So next we have Becca Tarnas, and she's going to be presenting on her recent research called Archetypal Ecology, Implications for a Planet in Crisis. Please welcome Becca.
What is a drought? Dry earth, cloudless skies, waiting, anticipating, counting days, weeks, months, perhaps years. When will the rain fall? Moisture slowly leaves the earth and plants begin to die. The emotional atmosphere is defined by denial, groundless hope, anxiety, concern, worry, and prayer. Dust builds and crops fail. Water, translucent, fluid, so easy to take for granted when it's in abundance. It's all you can think about when it's gone. As you've probably noticed, we're in a drought here in California. Droughts are actually very difficult to define. As Ivan Tannehill wrote in 1947, the first rainless day and a spell of fine weather contributes as much to the drought as the last. But no one knows how serious it will be until the last dry day is gone and the rains have come again. We are not sure about it until the crops have withered and died. Meteorologists and climatologists often use language such as evasive, elusive, uncertain to describe droughts. They've been called a creeping phenomenon. Essentially, a drought is lack of precipitation for an extended period of time, usually lasting multiple seasons. But of course, that varies from region to region, and it varies based on the natural cycles of those regions. One of the worst droughts that North America experienced was the 1930s droughts, the Dust Bowl. There were major dust storms. They forced migrations of those living in the Great Plains and the Midwest to come mostly out to California to pick fruits and vegetables that were growing out here, as is documented in John Steinbeck's beautiful novel, The Grapes of Wrath. Now, California is the bread basket, or rather the fruit and vegetable basket, of not only this country, but it exports a huge amount of produce as well. Yet that bread basket is in trouble with this drought. What do the Dust Bowl droughts and today's drought have in common? It so happens they both occurred under alignments of the planets Saturn and Neptune. In 1934 to 38, there was an opposition, 180-degree opposition of Saturn and Neptune. Today, we have a square, 90 degrees of Saturn and Neptune. It started last year and will go through 2017. In fact, if we look back through the record, in North America, the three worst droughts in the 20th century all happened under hard Saturn-Neptune alignments. So the 1930s Dust Bowl, there was a major drought in the 1950s that swept the central U.S., the Great Plains, the Midwest. And then in the late 1980s, there was a drought from the West Coast all the way to the Great Plains. All of them happened under Saturn-Neptune alignments. So why does Saturn-Neptune archetypally correlate with drought? Saturn is the archetype of contraction, negation, restriction, lack. It's the hard realities of life. Saturn is the principle of time, structure, decay, death, loss, and endings. It is also the archetype of hard work and discipline and organization. So any archetype that Saturn comes into relationship with, it will problematize, it will negate, it will constrain, and it will create obstacles. Neptune, on the other hand, it's the principle of fluidity, boundlessness, interconnectivity. Neptune is that which unifies, it merges, dissolves, and dilutes. Neptune is the principle of oceanic oneness, transcendent spirituality. It's the heavenly cosmos. Neptune is image and imagination, illusion and mirage. Neptune is the principle of water itself, both as a symbol and the physical liquid. So you can see how when they come together, Saturn and Neptune archetypally can manifest as drought, a lack of water. low moisture, negation of water's life-giving properties. Just to draw some images from the Dust Bowl, not only was there an absence of precipitation, the dry particles of dust flowed boundless across the land. They reduced visibility and even blackened the skies, blocking out the sun and blocking out the stars at night. As people who saw the major dust storms in the 30s, they described it like a massive wall of blowing dust that resembled a land-based tsunami. So you can see in this the Saturnian themes of lack, absence, dryness, reduction, and darkness, and the Neptunian qualities, rainwater, boundlessness, clarity of vision and perception, and the image of the celestial sky, all of which are negated and blocked and obscured by those Saturnian characteristics. Even the elusive quality of drought, the scientific difficulty in defining it, has a Saturn-Neptune quality, difficulty in definition relating to Saturn, and the slippery aspects of evasiveness and illusion relating to Neptune. So, the Dust Bowl in the 1930s happened under a Saturn-Neptune opposition. It's the full moon position. Then the following conjunction, the new moon position, as Max so well described in his presentation earlier, the full moon position of those two planets lined up with the devastating droughts of the mid-1950s, when again, not only was there a severe lack of rain, but there was so little water in the Mississippi that the ships, water-going vessels, you can hear the Saturn-Neptune language in that, the container, Saturn, on the water, Neptune, they were grounded in the base of the Mississippi. And there were also fires raging in Yellowstone Park in the 1950s droughts. The loss, Saturn, of a pristine and idealized national park. And then the next following conjunction, one full cycle later, the late 1980s, was the worst drought experienced in North America since the 1950s one. And what's interesting is that this drought came completely unexpectedly. People weren't prepared for it and caused a huge amount of damage. It was actually the most expensive natural disaster to occur in U.S. history. Now, in the late 1980s, not only were Saturn and Neptune in a conjunction, they were actually in a rare triple conjunction with Uranus. Uranus brings the unexpected, the sudden, the disruptive, which correlates to why this drought really seemed to come totally out of the blue. What about the intervening Saturn-Neptune oppositions and between the 50s and the 80s, and then the most recent opposition? Well, the opposition in the early 70s, El Nino that year was particularly strong, and there was drought and famine not only in the US, but in India, African Sahel, and Eastern Europe. And then the most recent opposition from 2004 to 2008. So the last time Saturn and Neptune were in hard aspect till now. Not only was there a mega drought in the Amazon, but there were major climate events that expressed Saturn-Neptune, but in a totally opposite way from drought. We'll remember from late 2004, the Indonesian tsunami, and then from the summer of 2005, Hurricane Katrina. Drought brings death and destruction through a lack of water. Tsunamis and hurricanes bring that same damage, but through flooding of water. So you can see the multivalence of the archetypes coming through in these different climate events. Of course, not all Saturn-Neptune periods correlate to drought, and certainly not all droughts have happened under Saturn-Neptune. That would indicate a fixed rigidity of the archetypal expressions that's actually not supported by the larger astrological evidence. It's too deterministic. And what we find in archetypal astrology is that it's not concretely predictive. We couldn't use this as a method to say there's definitely going to be a drought coming up or in the past. But it's archetypally predictive, and so we can get a sense of the range of qualities that will come through not only in the human events, but in Earth events. So there are other factors that complexify the picture and that are equally fruitful to explore. Other kinds of events, ecological events, and other planetary alignments. But for today, I wanted to demonstrate just this one compelling pattern that I found. The drought today is not only in California and the west coast of the United States. We're actually facing freshwater crises globally. This is because human beings are placing greater demand on diminishing sources of fresh water, and we're using fresh water unsustainably for industrial agriculture, for hydroelectric projects, for tar sands extraction, for fracking. The Saturn-Neptune transit right now seems to be bringing such issues to the forefront of collective consciousness. And yet, there have been many positive gains in the past under Saturn-Neptune alignments relating to issues of access to clean water, fresh air. For example, under the Saturn-Neptune square of 1963, the U.S. Clean Air Act was passed. And then the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972 under the following opposition. The Marine Mammal Protection Act was also passed in 1972. The Safe Drinking Water Act was passed in 1974, all under that same Saturn-Neptune opposition. In Canada, the Water Act was passed in 1970, and the Clean Air Act passed in 1971, again, all under the same Saturn-Neptune alignment. Saturn-Neptune brings many gifts as well, not only for the generations born with the aspect, but for the collective when we're in time periods when the two are transiting each other in the sky. Saturn and Neptune bring the ability to imagine practical solutions to concrete problems, to build a bridge between one's spiritual ideals and the real challenges that are facing the human community, to work both with and against societal structures, to embody ideals and spiritual values, and to manifest dreams through hard work, discipline, and organization. So I've laid out here one archetypal correlation between an ecological occurrence, drought, and a planetary alignment, Saturn-Neptune. And yet there are many examples with different archetypal alignments that you can see in volcanic eruptions, floods and tsunamis, the climate movement, the history of the ecological movement. Max was drawing our attention to that earlier, and you could see qualities of this as well in Molly's presentation. I've started referring to this field of inquiry as archetypal ecology. So by looking at the planetary correlations with not only human events, but Earth events, and also the human-Earth relationship. So we can actually apply these gifts of the archetypal complexes to the ecological challenges that we face under the same alignments. Basically, it feels as though we're being called to participate fully and consciously not only in an archetypal cosmos, but in an archetypal Earth.